guys, we are quinta and with our teacher Colombi we realized a Clill project about the Laffer curve. We are going to introduce it with some questions and a PowerPoint presentation. Let's start to know who is Laffer.
Professor Laffer is an economist born in 1940 in Ohio. Currently, he lives in Nashville, where he is the founder of Laffer Associates, an institutional economic research and consulting firm, as well as Laffer Investment and another institutional investment management firm utilizing diverse investment strategies. The firms provide research and investment management services to a diverse group of clients, which includes institutions, pension funds, corporations, endowments, foundations, individuals, and others.
Yes, and why is he famous?
Arthur Laffer was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he became famous because he was a member of President Reagan's Economy Policy Advisory Board from 1981 to 1989. But we know him for the development of the idea of Laffer curve.
Interesting, but how was the Laffer curve born?
The Laffer curve earned its name from a 1978 article by the late Jude Wanniski appearing in the public interest entitled Taxes, Revenues and the Laffer Curve. Wanniski recounted a 1974 dinner he attended with Arthur Laffer, Donald Rumsfeld, who was the chief of the staff of President Gerald Ford, and Dick Cheney. When the foursome's dinner's discussion win proposal, win stands for whip inflation now. So, when the win proposal turned to President Ford, Mr. Laffer is said to have grabbed his napkin to sketch the curve as an illustration of the trade-off between tax rates and tax revenues. Wanniski, the journalist, dubbed that trade-off as the Laffer curve.
Wow, and who is able to explain me what is the Laffer curve?
The Laffer curve is a graphical representation of the relationship between a tax rate, tax revenue and taxable income. The Laffer curve starts at 0% tax rate and tax revenue, because at 0% tax rate there are no revenues for the government. Then the curve rises to a maximizing point of the government revenues, at about 70% of tax rate. And then it falls again to 0 at 100% of tax rate, because no one would be willing to work and give the total amount of the wages to the government. However, the shape of the Laffer curve is uncertain, and so we may imagine two more different situations. In fact, if the citizens aren't satisfied, the peak of the Laffer curve is lower, maybe at about 30% of tax rate. In fact, the citizens are not pleased to pay a lot of taxes for the bad services offered, and so they tend to evade or elude the taxation system. On the other hand, if the citizens are satisfied of the services offered, they are willing to pay more taxes, and so the peak of the Laffer curve is higher, maybe at 80 or 90% of tax rate.
Well, and why tax revenues is 0% when the tax rates is 0% and 100%?
The Laffer curve shows that at a tax rate of 0%, the government will collect no tax revenue, just as it will collect no tax revenue at a tax rate of 100%, because no one would be willing to work for an after-tax wage of 0. The reasons for this is that tax rates have two effects on revenues. One is arithmetic and the other is economic. The arithmetic effect is static, meaning that if rates are lowered, the tax revenues per dollar of tax base will be lowered by the amount of the decrease in the rate, and vice versa for increasing tax rates. In other words, this is what happens when a hypothetical 1% tax collects $1 million. So people assume that a 2% tax will collect $2 million, and a 5% tax will collect $5 million. Likewise, under the same scenario, people would similarly assume that a 0.5% tax rate reduction will collect only $500,000.
The economic effect recognizes the positive impact that lower tax rates have on work, output and employment. which provide incentives to increase these activities. By contrast, raising tax rate penalizes people for engaging in these activities. The Laffer curve demonstrates what happens when the economic and arithmetic effect collide, explaining why a tax increase may reduce taxed activity and raise less revenue than otherwise predicted, just as a tax cut may increase taxed activity and raise more revenue than otherwise predicted.
Good, and does any tax rates reductions necessarily bring to an increase in tax revenues?
Importantly, the Laffer curve does not say whether a tax cut will raise or lower revenues, nor does it predict that any and all tax reduction would necessarily bring in more total revenues. Instead, it says that tax rate reductions will always result in a smaller loss in revenues than one would have expected. It is possible that this economic effect will swamp the arithmetic effect, causing an actual increase in tax revenue. However, the Laffer curve does not say that all tax cuts pay for themselves, as many people claim. What is true is that tax rate cuts will always lead to more growth, employment and income for citizens. There is, after all, more to fiscal policy than simply maximizing government revenue.
Fantastic, and is the idea of the Laffer curve new?
Although the curve bears Professor Laffer's name, the ideas behind it were not new or is alone. In fact, Dr. Laffer likes to point out that the ideas are so straightforward that people knew about it hundreds of years before. For example, the Muslim philosopher Ibn Khaldun wrote in the 14th century the Muqaddimah, in which the idea behind the Laffer curve is explained.
Thank you. Everything is clear now.